They say hearing is the last sense to fade when you die, the final tether snapping before you drift into the great silence. But in my case, it was the first sense to sharpen, cutting through the chemical fog like a knife through heavy velvet. I lay in the sterile white purgatory of room 402 at St. Jude's Hospital, my body feeling as heavy as lead, anchored to the mattress by a gravity that felt 3 times stronger than normal. A plastic tube was taped to my face, chafing against my upper lip, blowing dry, cool oxygen into my nose. Above me, or perhaps inside me, the rhythmic beep, beep, beep of the heart monitor marked the seconds of my life, counting them down like an accountant tallying a ledger that was about to be closed. My eyes were closed, glued shut by a mixture of exhaustion and the heavy residue of the sedatives they had been pumping into me for 3 days. That was the word I had heard floating in the ether before the darkness took me. But as I lay there, trapped in my own corpse-like stillness, my mind began to thaw. It wasn't a stroke. My mind was a calm, frozen lake, crystal clear and terrifyingly alert. I could feel the stiff sheets against my legs. I could smell the antiseptic cleaner and the faint underlying scent of wilting flowers. And I could hear. I heard the heavy, industrial click of the door latch. The air pressure in the room shifted. Then, the sound of heavy, frantic breathing filled the small space. It was a performance of hyperventilation I recognized instantly. It was my daughter, Clara. For a brief, agonizing moment, my heart swelled with a foolish, old man's hope. Even after everything, after the arguments about money, after the cold shoulders at Thanksgiving, after the way she looked at my bank statements like they were love letters addressed to someone else, I still wanted to believe she was crying for me. I thought she was terrified of losing her father. I thought she was remembering the man who had paid for her wedding, who had covered the down payment on her mortgage, who had bailed out her 3 failed boutique businesses without asking for a dime back. I wanted to believe that the tears were born of love, not loss. But then, the sobbing stopped. It didn't taper off. It snapped off like a light switch being flipped. "Are you okay?" a male voice asked. The voice was deep, smooth, and laced with an impatience that made my skin crawl. It was Derek, my son-in-law.
A man who shook my hand firmly at Sunday dinners, looked me in the eye, and called me Dad, while mentally appraising my vintage watch collection on my wrist. "He's a vegetable, Derek," Clara said. Her voice was unrecognizable. Gone was the shrill panic of the grieving daughter. In its place was a cold, flat annoyance that chilled my blood faster than the saline dripping into my arm. Dr. Evans said the cognitive function is basically gone. The swelling was too severe. "Good," Derek exhaled. I heard the groan of the leather recliner in the corner as he threw his weight into it. "That sounds harsh, babe, but good. Because the bridge loan is due on Friday. The investors are calling me every hour. If we don't liquidate the portfolio by then, we lose the house, we lose the cars." I know, Clara snapped, the sound of her heels clicking on the linoleum as she paced the room. "Stop pressuring me. Do you think I wanted to spend my Tuesday night mixing herbs? I'm exhausted, Derek. Looking at him, it's creepy." "We need him to sign the power of attorney," Derek said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Or we need him to, well, stop beeping. The life insurance payout is faster if he goes naturally, but the probate takes months." I lay there, paralyzed not by the drugs, but by the sheer, crushing weight of the betrayal. It wasn't a stroke. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was the tea. I remember Tuesday night. I had been sitting in my study, looking over the monthly expenses, worried about how much Clara was spending. She had come in, smiling that rare, sweet smile she used to have when she was 6 years old. She brought me a mug of herbal tea. "It's a special blend," she had said, "for stress. You look so tired, Daddy." I remembered the bitter taste, masked by too much honey. I remembered the way my vision had blurred 20 minutes later, the way the floor had tilted up to meet me. They hadn't waited for nature to take its course. They hadn't waited for old age to claim me. They had forced its hand. My own daughter had poisoned me because her husband had gambled away their lifestyle. I felt a scream building in my chest, a primal roar of rage and grief, but my throat was paralyzed. I couldn't move. I couldn't open my eyes. I was trapped in the dark with the monsters I had raised.
If you are listening to this, and you have ever looked at your children and wondered if their love is tied to your pulse or your purse strings, I beg you, don't make the mistake I did. Don't assume that blood is thicker than greed. I wish someone had warned me that the people who cry the loudest at the funeral are often the ones checking their watches, waiting for the reading of the will. If you have a feeling in your gut that you are being used, trust it. Subscribe to that instinct, because the alternative is waking up in a hospital bed, realizing you paid for your own murder weapon. We have to be smart about this, Clara said, her voice drifting closer to the bed. I felt her hand touch my arm. It wasn't a caress, it was a test. She pinched the skin of my forearm, hard. I didn't flinch. I couldn't. "Nothing," she said. "Nothing. He's gone, Derek." Derek asked. 1 o'clock, Clara replied. "We have an hour. Let's go get lunch. I need a drink. I can't look at him anymore." Derek suggested. "Sure," Clara said. I heard their footsteps retreating. I heard the door open and close. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. I wanted to tear the IV out of my arm. I wanted to strangle the ungrateful parasites I had harbored in my home. But I knew better. I was 75 years old, weak, drugged, and outnumbered. If I woke up now, thrashing and screaming without proof, they would just claim I was delirious. They would sedate me again, and next time, they would make sure I didn't wake up. I needed an ally. I needed a weapon. I waited until I was sure they were gone. I counted to 500 in the darkness. Then, summoning every ounce of willpower I had left, I forced my eyes open. The light was blinding. The room spun violently, a kaleidoscope of white walls and chrome equipment. My limbs felt like they were filled with wet concrete. I tried to lift my head, but it felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "Mister." The voice was soft, sharp with surprise. I turned my head on the pillow, the movement grinding against my stiff neck muscles. Standing by the door, holding a tray of fresh saline bags, was Sarah. Sarah was the night nurse, but she was picking up a day shift. I knew her. I knew her father. He was my old war buddy, a man I had carried out of the jungle in '68 when he took a piece of shrapnel to the leg. He had died 10 years ago, but I had kept my promise to look after his family. I had paid for Sarah's nursing school tuition anonymously.
She knew it was me, though we rarely spoke of it. "Sarah?" I rasped. My voice sounded like gravel crunching under tires, weak and broken. "The tea?" Sarah didn't gasp. She didn't drop the tray. She didn't argue with me or tell me I was confused. She set the tray down on the counter with a steady hand and rushed to the side of the bed. She checked my vitals, her face grim, her eyes scanning the monitors. "I know," she whispered, leaning close to my ear. "I saw the toxicology report, Elias. The levels of digitalis were off the charts. It mimics heart failure, but the ratios were wrong. I saved a blood sample before Dr. Evans threw it out. He's not asking the right questions." "They're coming back," I whispered, clutching her wrist. My grip was weak, trembling, but I held on like a drowning man. "Clara and Derek, they want to pull the plug, or force a signature. They think I'm a vegetable. I need them to say it again. I need proof, Sarah." Sarah nodded, her jaw setting tight. She looked at the door, then back at me. "We don't have much time." She reached into her oversized nursing bag sitting on the chair. She dug past the stethoscope in the charts and pulled out a small black device. It was a high-fidelity dictaphone, the kind doctors use for notes. "I use this for my classes," she said. She looked around the room. It was bare, sterile, functional. There were no hiding places. The drawers were clear plastic. The bed was open metal. Except for the massive, ostentatious bouquet of lilies and hydrangeas sitting on the bedside table, it was a centerpiece fit for a wedding, or a funeral. The card sticking out of the foliage read, in elegant calligraphy, "Get well soon, Daddy. Love, Clara." "The flowers," I said, pointing a shaking finger. Sarah understood immediately. She took the recorder. She checked the battery. She pressed the record button, and a tiny red light flickered to life. She tucked the recorder deep into the center of the arrangement, pushing the black plastic down among the green stems and the wet green floral foam.
She arranged the white lilies around it. It was invisible. It was buried in the very lie Clara had bought to mask her crime. "It's recording," Sarah whispered. "Thank you," I breathed, tears pricking my eyes. "I'll keep Dr. Evans away for an hour," Sarah whispered, smoothing the sheets over my chest. "I'll tell him I just did your vitals in your stable. But Elias, you have to play dead."
If you twitch, if you blink when they're looking at you, they'll know. "I can do it," I said. She squeezed my hand one last time and left the room. The door clicked shut. I closed my eyes. The darkness returned. But this time, it wasn't lonely. It wasn't a prison. It was a hunting blind. And I was waiting for the prey to walk in. 10 minutes later, the door opened. The smell hit me first. Expensive perfume, stale cigarette smoke, and the lingering scent of garlic and wine. Clara and Derek were back from their celebratory lunch. And they weren't alone. I heard a third set of footsteps, scuffing, heavy steps that sounded like cheap shoes. "This is the room," Derek said. "Good," a new voice said. It was oily, nasally. I recognized it immediately. It was Mr. Vance, the shady probate attorney Derek used for his business deals, the kind of lawyer who chased ambulances and drafted contracts in the back of dive bars. Vance asked. "He doesn't need to be lucid," Clara sneered. I could hear the smile in her voice. "I practiced his signature all morning. I have it down to the tremor. We just need you to witness it, Vance. You signed the attestation that he was awake and consented." "Fine," Vance grunted, "but we need to be quick." "The nurses are busy," Derek said dismissively. "Once the assets are transferred to the holding company, we tell Dr. Evans to initiate the DNR protocol. We'll say it's what he wanted. We'll say he didn't want to live like this." "Exactly," Clara said. I lay there, controlling my breathing, forcing my chest to rise and fall in the slow, mechanical rhythm of the coma. I slowed my heart rate, a trick I had learned 50 years ago in a muddy trench, waiting for the enemy patrol to pass. I visualized a metronome. Tick, tock, tick, tock. I heard the zipper of a briefcase opening. I heard the rustle of stiff paper, the sound of my life being stolen. I heard the click of a pen. "Okay," Clara said. I listened to the scratching of a pen on paper. It was a sharp, biting sound. She was forging my name. She was signing away the house I built, the savings I earned, the legacy I intended to leave. And all the while, buried deep in the white lilies that symbolized purity and grief, the little red light inside the flowers was blinking. Blink, blink, blink. It was recording every damning syllable. It was capturing the conspiracy. It was the only weapon I had left, and as I lay there playing dead, I prayed it was enough to bury them.
"Done," Clara announced, the pen hitting the table. "Let me see," Vance said. A pause. "Yeah, that'll pass probate." "Now," Derek said, his voice thick with triumph. "Pop the champagne, babe." "Derek, not here," Clara giggled. Derek laughed. "He can't see us. He can't hear us." I felt a vibration on the bedside table as they set something down. The pop of a cork echoed in the room. I lay still. I waited. The script was written, but they didn't know I had changed the ending. The sound of a pen scratching against paper is usually the sound of commerce, of agreements, of progress. But in that sterile hospital room, with the smell of antiseptic battling the scent of expensive perfume, it sounded like a knife carving meat. It was a sharp, biting noise, scritch, scratch, scritch, that seemed to echo inside my skull, louder than the rhythmic beeping of the monitor that claimed I was dying. The scratching stopped. The deed was done. In the eyes of the law, or at least the distorted version of the law being fabricated in room 402, I was now destitute. I was a husk, a line item to be closed out. Clara, the little girl I had carried on my shoulders at the zoo, the woman whose student loans I had paid off without a second thought, was now the sole executor of an estate worth $5 million. She had just signed my name. She had forged the final surrender of my life's work. I heard the heavy, confident snap of a briefcase latch closing. It was the sound of a predator finishing a meal. "That should do it," Mr. Vance, the lawyer, said. His voice was oily, thick with the satisfaction of a man who had just earned a very large, very illegal fee.
The notary seal is backdated to yesterday morning, just before the stroke incapacitated him. It's bulletproof, Derek. Perfect, Derek exhaled. I heard the rustle of fabric as he stood up, likely stretching his legs after the arduous task of watching his wife commit a felony. That covers the bridge loan, the cars, and the second mortgage. Then came a sound that made my blood, already laced with toxins, turn to ice. Pop. It was the distinct, festive sound of a champagne cork leaving a bottle. They had brought alcohol. They had actually brought a bottle of champagne into the room where they planned to murder me, chilling it while they waited for me to drift off into the dark. The sheer, naked audacity of it was almost impressive in its depravity.
I heard the fizz of the liquid being poured into glasses, likely paper cups from the dispenser by the sink, or maybe they had been arrogant enough to bring flutes. To the future, Derek toasted, his voice thick with greed and self-congratulation. And to the old man. Don't be gross, Derek, Clara laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It was light, airy, the sound of tinkling broken glass. But yes, finally, I was so sick of begging for my own inheritance. It's better this way, really. He was lonely. He was getting older. A favor. The word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Poisoning my tea was a favor. Forging my signature was a favor. Killing me to pay off her husband's gambling debts was an act of mercy. That single word severed the last thin thread of attachment I had to the woman standing a few feet away. The grief I had felt in the darkness evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve that felt like iron in my spine. "I'll go get the doctor," the lawyer said, his footsteps moving toward the door. "We need to initiate the DNR protocol immediately. The sooner we pull the support, the less suspicion there is." "Go," Derek said. This was it, the midpoint twist, the edge of the cliff. I could wait for Sarah to burst in with the police, hoping she timed it right, or I could end this myself. I could take back the agency they had stolen from me. I didn't wait. My left hand was hidden under the stiff hospital sheet, resting by my hip. I had located the plastic control remote for the bed 10 minutes ago, keeping my fingers hovered over it. My thumb found the button with the arrow pointing up. I pressed it. Whirr! The mechanical sound of the bed motor cut through their laughter like a chainsaw ripping through a quiet Sunday morning. It was a loud, grinding whine that filled the small room. Clara gasped, a sharp intake of breath. The head of the bed began to rise. It wasn't fast. It was agonizingly, dramatically slow. Inch by inch, the mechanism lifted me. I rose with it, ascending from the horizontal pose of the corpse they wanted me to be to the seated posture of the judge I was about to become. I kept my eyes closed for the first few seconds, letting the terror take root in the room. I heard a glass hit the floor. I heard the shuffle of feet packing away. Then, when I was fully upright, I opened my eyes. The light in the room was bright, but I didn't squint. I didn't blink. I locked my gaze directly onto Clara's face. She had drained of all color, her skin turning the shade of old parchment, leaving her looking like a wax doll melting in the heat of my stare. Her mouth was open in a silent scream, her hands trembling where they clutched a plastic cup of champagne. Derek had dropped his cup. It sat on the linoleum, a puddle of cheap sparkling wine spreading over his expensive Italian loafers. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost, his arrogance stripped away to reveal the cowardice underneath. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the steady beep, beep, beep of the monitor, which had picked up speed, not from fear, but from fury. "Clara," squeaked. Her voice was barely a whisper, trembling so hard it fractured the air. You're awake. Oh, thank God. We were just..." She took a step toward me, her instincts to lie kicking in faster than her brain could process the impossibility of the situation. She reached out a hand, as if to pat my arm, as if to push me back down into the grave. "To finish for you," I finished for her. My voice was rough, scraping against my throat like sandpaper, but it was stronger than it had been in days. It was fueled by a rage so pure, it felt like rocket fuel burning in my veins. "What were you doing?"
I asked, my eyes drilling into hers. No, no, Elias, you're confused, Derek stammered, stepping in front of the lawyer, trying to block my view of the briefcase, of the evidence. He put on his best used car salesman smile, though his lip was twitching. We were just praying, Elias. We were having a toast to your recovery. We were signing papers to protect your assets while you got better. What are you doing? I asked. The words came out low and dangerous. Dad, stop. You're hallucinating, Clara cried, tears springing to her eyes. Fake, manipulative tears. It's the medication. I know exactly what I'm saying, I said. I reached over to the bedside table. My movement was stiff, my muscles atrophied from the poison, but my aim was true. I didn't reach for the water pitcher. I didn't reach for the call button. I reached for the massive bouquet of lilies. Clara flinched, throwing her hands up, thinking I was going to throw the heavy glass vase at her head. Instead, I plunged my hand into the wet stems. I felt the cold water, the slimy floral foam. My fingers closed around the small, hard plastic of the device Sarah had hidden. I pulled it out, scattering white petals across the table. I held the small black recorder up to the light. The red LED was still blinking.
A steady, unblinking eye of justice. Derek stared at it. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His knees actually buckled. What? He whispered. I took a deep breath. My lungs burned, but I shouted with every ounce of strength I had left. The door burst open instantly. Sarah didn't come alone. She walked in flanked by 2 uniformed police officers and the hospital administrator, a tall woman in a short suit who looked absolutely furious. I heard everything from the hallway, the administrator said, stepping into the room and glaring at the lawyer, who was now trying to shove papers back into his briefcase with shaking hands. Recording devices are strictly prohibited in this hospital, Mr. Sterling. Clara shrieked, the sound piercing the air. He's fine! Look at him! He's sitting up! Officer, I said, handing the recorder to the nearest policeman. Play it. The officer took the device. He pressed the button. Clara's voice filled the room, tinny, distorted, but unmistakably hers. It echoed off the tile walls, a ghost of her own malice coming back to haunt her. Once the assets are transferred, we tell Dr. Evans to remove the life support. We'll say it's what he wanted. The silence that followed the recording was louder than the screaming scream. It was a vacuum that sucked the air out of the room. Clara looked at the recorder, then at me, her eyes wide with a horror that was finally, satisfyingly real. The lawyer, Mr. Vance, slammed his briefcase shut and tried to edge toward the door. I was misled regarding the client's condition. I was told he was brain dead. I am withdrawing my counsel. You're not going anywhere, the second officer said, stepping in front of the door and blocking the exit with his bulk. We have the toxicology report from Nurse Sarah regarding the digitalis levels in the patient's blood, and now we have a conspiracy confession recorded on tape. Clara collapsed. It wasn't a graceful faint like in the movies. Her legs simply gave out under the crushing weight of her exposed malice. She fell to her knees, hitting the floor hard, sobbing, ugly, heaving sobs that shook her entire body. "Daddy, please," she begged, crawling toward the bed, reaching for my hand with her manicured fingers. "It was Derek. He made me do it. He has gambling debts, Daddy. The sharks were coming for us. I was scared. I didn't want to do it." I looked at her. I looked at the woman crawling on the hospital floor. I looked for the little girl who used to bring me drawings. I looked for the teenager I taught to drive. I looked for the bride I walked down the aisle. They were all gone. Dead. Murdered by the woman kneeling before me. "You don't love me, Clara," I said. My voice was flat, dead, devoid of any warmth. "You love the lifestyle I provided. You love the safety net." She froze, her hand hovering inches from mine. She looked up, and she saw the truth in my eyes. She saw that the bank was closed. Forever. "Derek convinced you to poison the tea," I said, looking at my son-in-law, who was currently being handcuffed against the wall. "But you brewed it. You served it," she whimpered. "Get them out of my sight," I said to the officers, turning my head away. The room erupted into chaos. Derek was shouting obscenities, blaming Clara, blaming me, blaming the lawyer. Clara was wailing like a banshee as the officer pulled her to her feet and cuffed her hands behind her back. The lawyer was stammering about rights and representation. I watched them drag my daughter out of the room. She looked back at me one last time, her mascara running down her face, her eyes pleading. I didn't blink. I didn't look away. I watched until the door closed, cutting off her screams. The room slowly emptied. The administrator nodded to me respectfully and followed the police to handle the paperwork. It was just me and Sarah. The silence returned, but it wasn't the silence of the coma. It was the silence of a battlefield after the guns have stopped firing. I looked at the shattered champagne glass on the floor, the shards glittering in the fluorescent light. I looked at the empty space where my daughter had stood. Sarah walked over to the bed. She picked up the recorder from the officer's table and placed it in her bag for evidence. She gently adjusted my pillows. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, her hand resting on my shoulder. I leaned back, the adrenaline crashing out of my system, leaving me feeling hollowed out, scraped clean. My chest ached with a pain that no medicine could touch. "No," I said, staring at the white ceiling tile above me. "I'm not okay, Sarah." "You saved your life," Sarah said firmly. "I suppose," I whispered. I closed my eyes, feeling the sting of tears I refused to shed while they were watching. The hospital room was quiet again. The beep of the monitor was steady, a rhythmic reminder that I was still here. I was alive. I was wealthy. I was vindicated. I had won the war.
But as I lay there, listening to the silence where my family used to be, I realized that the price of the truth was a very heavy thing to carry. It weighed more than the grief, more than the betrayal. But I would carry it, because dignity is the only thing you can take with you when you really do go. And tonight, I still had mine.